listening to CapConversation, the digital discourse of financial services today with Capco and guests. Today, we're going to be talking to Tamer Hassan, co-founder and CEO of WhiteOps, the global leader in bot fraud protection. I'm your host, Audra Schoenfeld-Fuhrer, and I'm joined by Capco colleagues Nick Parmaksizian, global head of digital, and Julian Bonnay, head of cybersecurity. Welcome, everybody.
Hi, Audra.
Good morning.
And Tamer, a special thanks to you for joining us today. To start us off, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to WhiteOps.
Sure. Yeah. Good morning, and happy to be here. WhiteOps, as you mentioned, is a global bot mitigation company. We deal with advanced cybercrime and fraud and abuse use cases across a different set of markets and use cases. I'm the co-founder and CEO of WhiteOps. I was actually the co-founding CTO for the first 7 years, where I ran the detection teams, engineering, and product before ultimately taking the lead role in the company to take it to other markets and use cases. Prior to that, a bit of time spent. I've had an interesting journey overall, both across digital and software development. And I spent 10 years in the Air Force in military aviation, flying search and rescue Black Hawks at that time, and originally trained in mechanical engineering prior to that. So I've had quite a journey, and this is one of the latest set of important problems I feel for the internet and the integrity of the internet whole, which is what brought us together in the beginning to start the company.
Thanks for that. Certainly a very interesting journey. So you talked a little bit about WhiteOps, which I think you founded in 2012 in a Brooklyn sci-fi bookstore. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that, and the mission in particular really inspired you for your current journey.
Yeah, it was quite the start, and it wasn't completely expected or planned. We had stumbled upon a problem. I was working on another problem, basically doing some data analysis on a potential fraud case for a client of mine. And funny things started to show up in the data. And as we pulled the threads on it a little bit more, the rabbit hole just got deeper. I ultimately connected with a couple friends of mine that became my co-founders, Michael Tiffany, Dan Kaminsky. Dan, who was well noted in the security world for solving some major DNS problems earlier in his career. And as we took a harder look at this, we started to realize the implications and what we saw as a fundamental integrity problem for the internet, basically knowing whether or not there was a human on the other end of the screen. And it's something that we saw was common to a lot of fraud and abuse use cases. As we began to dig in, there were some core principles that really emerged. And one is that there's only one competitor that matters in this space, and that was the bad actor. Everything was largely about this game of adaptation and this ongoing battle of which we haven't, as a security community, comprehensively solved for. The more we whiteboarded out the problem and where it could go, and we saw bots being used for many things, everything from, obviously account takeovers, credential stuffing attacks, to manipulating metrics and popularity on the web, to interacting with digital media, and a variety of things in between, scalping and sniping on e-commerce, card not present attacks in financial transactions. It goes pretty wide, and the problem ultimately evolved into, if you can look like a million humans, what can you do? And the answer is a lot of things, and it goes from there.
Absolutely. I think that the breadth of what it covers, to your point, is what really makes it such a significant problem, and great that you guys are trying to tackle the bad actors head on. So certainly we talk about, that affects absolutely every facet. I think what we do doesn't matter the industry. Thought we'd talk a little bit about a topic that's, everybody's mind is on today, which is COVID-19. I mean, certainly the unforeseen global pandemic with that is not something that's disappearing anytime soon. and would want to know a little bit more about what's keeping you up at night from the impacts you've seen on the cybersecurity side as we've all moved to, heavily remote work, nothing in person, and those sorts of things.
Yeah. I mean, COVID-19 has changed us as a society in so many ways, and fortunately, in some positive ways as well. Right, the ability for all of us to get more comfortable collaborating and working together, both in our companies and with our customers remotely and over a distance. And that has ultimately, led to, as we know, a mass shift in digital transformation. The number of companies that have accelerated that journey is beyond, I think, what everyone anticipated. One of the byproducts of that is that the number of surface areas to protect and cover is magnified, 100x, and will be over the next few years as companies continue to move to a digital footprint and a digital experience, whether that's bringing stores online or workflows online or access online. And so the number of surface areas just got a lot bigger for all of us to protect, and the education posture and the essentially the role of security, as we all know, is just an ongoing battle against convenience and practicality and business objectives. And, we haven't really comprehensively solved that. I think we've made some progress there, but, we see fraud increasing. We've seen volumes increasing dramatically over the first 6 months of this year, and expect that to continue over the next few years.
Yeah, Tamer, this is Julian. I would tend to agree with you. And everywhere we're walking, we see definitely a surge of both digital transformation and people working remotely. At the same time, to your point, we see a lot of increase of cyber attacks. And not enough talents on the market to address this anywhere in the world, actually. I was reading a report, where I saw about 60% of digital businesses will suffer from big, large service failure over the next year, mainly probably due to the inability of the security teams to manage this digital risk holistically. So, on our side, we're really thinking about what solutions will work to guardrail the digital transformation from a cyber angle, and we're thinking a lot about how we can still use humans, but also use tools that are actually used by bad actors, such as AI, intelligence, machine learning, but still trying to keep a simple and clean way for the good people to access their services, especially in the financial services industry.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, there's an element of this problem that goes deeper. We spend a lot of time as a community, we have working to minimize damages and lower risk. But there's another layer of what it actually takes to put ourselves in a winning position in the problem. I think that's largely been out of whack. When we really pulled apart this problem in the beginning, we came to a core principle that we built the entire company around, and that was this is an economic challenge. Like the real and only major path to lower sustained levels of fraud and cybercrime is to change the economics of the game board, to make it more costly to bad actors than to all of us to defend. And that's largely been out of whack for as long as we can remember. The cost of 1,000 attacks is cheap. The cost of one breach is incredibly expensive, and the odds, have always been against us as defenders. And so we have to find a way to actually flip that and build around changing the economics so that we're leveraging our collaboration, our collective protection, as we call it at White Ops, against adversaries, right? And that may mean sharing technology and indicators and knowledge. It also means using advanced techniques like deception and manipulating feedback loops. I think there's basic best practices, but largely it's been around accepting a certain number of losses. And I think we can address the problem more comprehensively, and that's what we've worked on building at White Ops. The core mission statement that came out of that is to disrupt the economics of cybercrime. That's the mission of the company, and we actually feel it's more of a technical strategy than anything that has its own best practices.
Thanks so much for that. I think that certainly that's a significant problem. And I think the point around making it more costly to bad actors and for all of us to defend it is, the right approach. And Julian touched on it a little bit, but, from our end in the Capco side and financial services, we see often that the cyber solutions are the afterthought when it comes to the digital journey for the clients, when it comes to passwords, multi-factor authentication, all that good stuff. And, is this something that you see in your experience helping protect from the bots taking over accounts, disrupting marketing campaigns, that type of thing? Because, as we talk about digital transformation in the journey, how we are able to make it easier for us to defend, but not make it disruptive to the customer experience is certainly often diverse objective.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. The path of least friction is common to all industry verticals, and it's an important one that we have to evolve to support in more ways from a technology standpoint. The largely multi-factor auth hasn't been mandated even in financial services, and so it's starting to become more and more adopted. But the impact on user friction, and we see that as a part of our role as well. It's not just to minimize losses to fraud, but also the inverse. One of the major opportunities is actually minimize friction on real users when you know that something is low risk. And it's important across all industries. We see it in e-commerce quite a bit as well. It makes a difference. I remember even being in scenarios where folks were measuring millisecond ranges of performance of an application and tying that to revenue KPIs, large companies on the internet, right? So all of this actually matters. There's always this challenge between security and convenience, but the more and more we evolve our technology, we can actually flip that. So one of the things we think about, as I said earlier, is instead of presenting a CAPTCHA to a user, for example, which is the wrong idea. You're putting the burden of proof on all the humans. We should actually be putting it on the bots and the bad actors. So we run, technical Turing tests silently in the background. And also when we know we've seen a human that we see across all of the marketplaces and industries that we address, we know there's an opportunity also to lower risk and lower friction, and we can give that signal back. So I think there's ways to improve on it, but and embrace it more or less, because it is important to businesses across the landscape to minimize the user friction element of how we do security.
Tamer, this is Nick here. On this topic of customer experience, I was talking to one of my clients yesterday in wealth management. And one of the interesting changes that we are seeing from a customer point of view is that customers today are actually more likely to trust and seek out advice from a bot than from a human being. And the argument is because what we hear is that, a bot, it was going to make a recommendation based on data. And that's a very new thing, whereas only a couple of years ago in financial services, we had humans who would be more likely effectively to follow the advice of a human being. What does it
what does it tell us in terms of implications? And are there any things that we can do to distinguish between good bots and bad bots?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and it's a fascinating one. And we've watched the world of bots evolve over the last decade in a variety of ways. We've even picked up on bots recently designed to listen to music on music platforms because there is a value and an incentive to making something more popular. So what has emerged is a marketplace of nefarious bot activity that is bought and sold to do a variety of things. So it's listen to a song, do social actions on different platforms, make something more popular. Even looking back at the net neutrality vote in the U.S. a few years back, which was a really important policy. There was a comment for one of the federal portals for public sentiment, and there was millions of comments posted with the identities of dead people on this portal to influence the policy vote that was happening in DC. And it was one of the first times we've seen bots overtly used to influence policy. And we see the same thing on the flip side, right? That there is a variety of bots that are being used for a lot of things, including in security cases, vulnerability scanning. In some cases, malware scanning, which requires covert bot activity on the internet. But the crux of it is actually that bots have become more and more human over the last decade, and that's the true challenge, right? And we often talk about things like AI and ML, and I think you hit the nail on the head earlier. It's those are tools, and they're not tools limited to the good actors. Technology is democratic. It can be used by anybody, and it is being used by bad actors. And one of the other observations we've had in this area, when you look at the spectrum of bot activity, it could be something very simple like a script running in a data center on a bunch of machines, which is usually easy to pick up. But the thing that has survived over the years is actually much different. It's malware-based botnets. It's our own devices and laptops that are infected with something running in the background. It's my daughter's iPad that has a bunch of games with certain SDKs, and who knows? I should probably do a better job policing it. But it's those kinds of things, which means that it has, it's coming from the same IP address. It's coming from the same device ID. If we're logged into a social media platform, so is the bot because it's operating in the background with our browser. And, it evolves actually into something that we call compromised identity. So that looking like a million humans is actually achievable. And, we've even seen, almost 10 years ago, the Zeus malware, for example, it would record the mouse movements of its infected human users and use that to replay when it was doing other things, so that it appeared perfectly human. The mouse movements appeared perfectly human. So, I think the crux of it is that bots are looking more and more human, and we have to come up with better ways to protect against it.
That makes sense. Thanks, Tamer. I think, and certainly in financial services, we are, supporting our clients with this proliferation of bots to essentially drive automations and release efficiencies. And there's obviously an explosion as well of connected intelligent devices. And one of the concerns is always going to be, I think, what if somebody takes over those devices? Is there anything that our clients, we can do, I suppose, to potentially mitigate that risk?
There's always great practices, right? And the right thing here is, there's basics, right? The best practices with managing passwords and password vaults and using multi-factor auth. But I feel like that's not the right answer to the question, or perhaps maybe we can modify the question a bit. And the real question is how do we get ourselves to a place of confidence where we're not holding our breath for the next attack.
Right.
And that's why I always come back to, how do we change the game board? And, there's one of these principles that came out of the defense industry here in the U.S. A few decades ago called the OODA loop. And, it's been adopted in companies in the Fortune 1000. It's an acronym that stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. It's basically a model on how you react to an adversary on any game. It could be a chess match. It could be something in the cyber landscape. It could be actual wartime. And the idea is that any reaction, you always have to walk through your OODA loop, right? Observe, orient, decide, act. And you can model your adversary this way, and they can model you this way. And so the idea is actually to make your OODA loop faster than your adversaries, or to disrupt their OODA loop. And if you can do that sustainably, then you've changed the economics. You've actually made the long-term cycle of adaptation cost-effective for yourself. And so that's what we think about when we think about, changing the game board.
Thank you so much for that. And actually, if you think there's a path, that leads me to my question. You made the comment earlier that, it's really, when it comes to cybersecurity, it should be more than best practices. And that, today there's lots of pieces to the puzzle, but it's really putting the burden of proof on the human side. And you made the comment about, ideally you want something more from the technology layer that can run silently in the background. So are you in kind of the utopian vision, or in the future state, do you think that we get to a stage where, the need for me to remember 60 different passwords that change every 90 days and, have all my security questions and ways to put the burden on me to be safe with when I log in would potentially be able to go away and make the user experience easier, because it can be purely driven by the technical evidence on the back end and allowing technology to keep those folks from being the bad actors?
I do, and I do believe we're making great progress there. And single sign-on and SAML is just one direction where you log in one place, and you don't have to log in all the others. And more we can do that, the better. But even just evolving how we think about passwords and how we think about risk, you can almost separate this into two types of vulnerabilities, risks, or attacks, right? There's, impersonating humans, and then there's also taking over our own machines, what's commonly known as a session takeover, right? Where you're logged in to your bank, and so is the malware. And so that first layer, we're making great progress as far as who's logging in and making sure the right devices are logged in. And I think we can get to a place where that is seamless. There's a lot of research there. The challenge that will come after that, and the next big challenge, I believe, in the account integrity and account takeover space will be the session takeover. It'll be our own infected accounts where, when we originally looked at this problem almost 10 years ago, it was about man in the browser attacks, right? Where you log into your bank to do a high value wire transfer. You go through all the steps, to do the wire transfer. You're logged in. You do the secondary auth. Perhaps you even get a phone call, and you validate it, and then the malware intercepts the transaction, manipulates where it goes, intercepts the response, and gives it back to the browser, and everything looks good. And it's a very difficult and different attack, one that's based in essentially automation workflow. That's actually what inspired a lot of the work for differentiating between bot and human. So I think we have a little bit more work to do to solve that problem after we get to a place where we're at least solving the login problems, if that makes sense.
I think it does, Tamer, and we're very much in line with having technology solutions, helping both the defense against bad actors, but also probably ease the pain of the good people like you and me, trying to do business. I think one of the challenge we see far is I was discussing with quite a few clients before this podcast, and I've seen that only 1 out of 5, at least there's an agreement that only 1 out of 5 clients involve the security teams once a new product is launched early on. So there's a lot of potential technology that could be used to really reduce the friction while still guardrail the transformations that the financial services industry is going through. But now we are ending with a lot of banks with about 80% of them for new products or new channels that involve cybersecurity teams or technology teams very late in the game, leading to what we see every day with a lot of clunky ways of securing the client journeys or the employees' journeys. So really think that combining both all these new technologies that you talked about with the right operating model where everyone understands that cybersecurity is not just about a catalog of controls for insurance, as you said, but also to provide ways to be a differentiated to have a differentiated user journey is going to be key in the future.
I completely agree. The more we can move from cybersecurity solutions being an additional layer to something that is enabling the business objectives more directly, I think the better. And in all of my conversations with customers and prospects, we what I've learned, as we talk through the different layers of the value proposition, right, and minimizing damages and losses to fraud is a real part of the value prop. But often what resonates comes from things like minimizing risk and friction on real users. And I think, I actually think cybersecurity can flip that to an advantage because that's something that can be led by security solutions and security teams. And and that goes into other layers as well. It's what's quite interesting, and one thing that has surfaced for us in the last few years is one of the byproducts of this problem is that the data analytics are sometimes skewed, and the integrity of the data is at risk. And we found that in some cases much more of a moving lever for addressing these problems, because you're starting to get and align with I think the business objectives and the goals of the business. So I couldn't agree more, Julian.
Just have one final supposed point. This is Nick here. Tamer, you talked about earlier the importance of education. And we hear a lot about the need to create a culture of cybersecurity. I mean, certainly when it comes to digital transformation, we talk to our clients about the importance of really rethinking your culture to be able to embrace this, new ways of working and, new ways of thinking when it comes to innovation. But rarely do we talk actively about creating a culture of cybersecurity, especially with smaller organizations. What are your thoughts around how to create a culture of cybersecurity?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think a lot of that work really is around creating value and belief. That's always a starting place to me when you're pulling apart any big problem is what do you believe and what do you value? And I mean that in that if we just get to a place where everybody understands the value of it, everything starts to build from there. And the other side of it, and the belief, which I think, we haven't done enough yet, is that, believing that we can win, or believing that we can comprehensively get ourselves to a place of confidence and security in our risks is not something that's widely felt or adopted. I rarely see, companies in cybersecurity coming out of the week, waving the white flag of victory rather than, minimizing and coming out a little bit bloody and saying, oh man, we minimized damages that week. That's usually the feel, right? So, but I think to come back to the heart of your question, the best thing we can do is just embed the value and the importance of it. Especially in the SMB layer, the mid-market, the smaller companies,
yes,
because we don't necessarily want them to worry about the fight. And that's the other thing. We have to recognize that this is not about, putting a feature or function in place. This is an ongoing battle, and it has its own principles of adaptation, playing the long game instead of the short game. And we don't want everyone to have to worry about that. That should be the job of the security community, whether it's inside the company or outside the company. So I think the best thing we can do is educate people to the point where they understand the value and the importance of it. And also to the point where they believe that we can get to a place of confidence rather than insurance.
Thank you so much for that. I think certainly, with folks like yourself and White Ops, you have us believing we can win that battle. So, we're on that side as well. And we've really appreciated your time today, Tamer. Thanks so much. It's been a great conversation having you.
Likewise, Nick, Julian, Audra, it's always great to talk with you guys. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to CapConversation, a Capco production. This podcast is for information only and should not and does not constitute consulting services.